So I had made a video about why it's not, it may not necessarily be in your best interest from a safety or an effort or a dating standpoint to go over to a man's house on the first date or very early on in the dating, in your dating experience. And I have a question here that I want to answer from a commenter. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed therapist. This person writes, it makes me question them, meaning women or people who go over to a man's house on the first date. Where's the stranger danger? Where's the self-preservation? What if I personally am not safe? Why if you open the door and there's five men that are waiting for you? So this person is essentially asking, or what I think they're asking is why would someone be inclined to go over to a man's house early on if you don't know them. And there's several reasons why, but one of the things that I've known in working with people over the years is people, there's a number of reasons. Usually, in my experience, women or people who do this have a history of abuse. There's a thing that happens with people who have been abused, and if they've experienced danger on several levels, sometimes without even recognizing it or having the awareness. They will do what I call walking into the lion's den, which means that they will walk directly into the face of danger, or their activities can seem a bit careless or reckless, or where they're not considering their safety. And it's really more or less an unconscious thing. Well, it's like if anything's going to happen to me anyway, then it is what it is. And I'm not saying this to be mean, cold, or callous, but this is just one of the things that happens. Also, too, I've worked with adolescents and juveniles, and so when I worked with adolescent and juvenile girls, they would do this a lot. These were kids who had been in the system, group home, foster care, and things like this, where they would just jump in somebody's car that they don't know. And this is a type of attachment disorder, a real attachment disorder. I'm not talking about avoidant and all that other stuff that's commercialized. It's a disinhibited engagement social disorder. They usually learn this pattern of behavior of running to strangers, usually when their parent isn't present. So, for example, I'm sure if you're on TikTok or any other sort of media outlet, you've seen like a baby who's like wandering in the road, right? A baby, a toddler, or a small infant that's sort of wandering around. There's no parent in sight, and they just sort of wander into a stranger's arm, and they're okay with being picked up by a stranger and things like that. That is disinhibited social engagement disorder. That is what that looks like, where a baby is not like looking for their mom. They're not worried. They're just overly trusting. And usually that happens because of extreme neglect, or their parent has already conditioned them to be around a lot of people, unsavory characters, in a lot of times, in a lot of instances. So that child has been conditioned very early on to be around anybody and everybody. This is also something that tends to happen if you grow up in a party house. So if your parents have people that are constantly in and out, overcrowding, you got all these people, things like that. This can come from those types of situations. And so people with, and disinhibited social engagement disorder, technically from the DSM-5 standpoint, it occurs in childhood. But my experience is it usually continues on into adulthood where, again, this is a pattern of behavior. that's repeated, and you don't necessarily know that something's wrong with it until you're taught something differently. So you will continue to invite strangers into your home. You will continue to go over to a stranger's house or hop in a stranger's car that you've only known for 5 minutes. And so that happens, and that to me is definitely a trauma response, where it can also be a trauma response where, again, as a youngster or somewhere along your life's journey, you have learned or been made to feel like your condition, your boundaries, your defenses need to be down, and so you don't have the right to protect yourself. And so a lot of times this stuff sort of bleeds over into adulthood, into intimacy, and it can get you into some pretty precarious, hairy, or sticky situations. This also goes along with criminal behavior. So a lot of times, and I've worked with prisoners over the years, and I've told you guys that for anybody who's followed me a long time, there's a lot of people in prison who just got in a car and went to go do this quick criminal job with somebody that they didn't know. So a lot of that is very fast paced, it's very impulsive. It's let me get something quick. So it's usually high risk, under the guise of, having a high reward. So if we go hit this lick, we go commit this robbery, we're going to make X amount of dollars and things like that. Very same thing. It's like, okay, well, so that there's a lot of that goes into that lifestyle, and a lot of them get locked up behind that. I can't tell you how many people say, it's very impulsive. Like, I'm not thinking through the long-term consequences. I'm just going to go over here and do this thing with somebody. I'm just going to go over here on this date with someone really quick. So you're not really thinking through that behavior. So if you have a high rate of impulsivity, where you're not thinking through the long-term consequences, where you're sort of act now, think later type of person, you can find yourself in these sorts of predicaments. But these are this is not a comprehensive list. It's just some of the things that I have seen over the years where I've talked about people. And lastly, the other thing I'll mention too is modeling, modeling behavior. So if you grew up with seeing your parents do this, it's often a cycle that is repetitive. So if your mom or dad did this, they're quick to have people over, quick to have people around their children, or they're quick to go over there and stay and start a relationship from that, where you're quickly, where it's normal to build intimacy, or at least have this physical connection very quick, where you're just sort of you meet a dude once, and next thing you know, he's over at your house, moving in, and that sort of stuff. So that stuff can also be passed down and very, very normalized, and then you take it on as your own behavior, where it's like, oh, this is how I was always taught to date, is to just have somebody over, and now we're dating, and that's how our life begins. But just let me know what you guys think. And again, it's not comprehensive, but just some of the more common things that I've seen over the years. So like, comment, follow, and share, and repost. Thank you so much. Take care.